What I'm about to tell you sounds completely insane, but it's 100% true. Tonight we're diving into medieval wedding nights, and trust me, you've never heard anything like this before. Picture this, you just got married, the feast is roaring, the halls are packed with people, and every noble, merchant and serf is staring at you. But here's the kicker, this isn't your cozy candlelit dinner with a string quartet. No, you're about to consume food so vile, so grotesque, that modern stomachs would revolt instantly. They serve a mystery meat stew that could be anything from horse to rat, maybe even dog, depending on what the local cook could scavenge that day. People eat it anyway because hunger is a relentless tyrant. You're expected to smile, raise your goblet of warm, sour ale, and pretend this culinary horror is a delicacy. Your teeth? Yeah, good luck with those. Cavities, abscesses, and rotting gums are the norm. If your spouse opens their mouth too close to yours, the stench could knock you out cold. And the wedding night? That's where it gets brutal. The concept of privacy is practically non-existent. The newlywed's bed is often dragged out into a semi-public space so the marriage can be witnessed by relatives and servants. Imagine being forced to perform intimate acts while an audience of your in-laws and neighbours are basically leaning over your shoulder, nodding, and making comments. Humiliation on a scale that would break the strongest modern ego. If you think that's insane, wait until I tell you about the ceremonial consummation test. In some regions, it was a common practice to verify that the bride was still a virgin. Witnesses, sometimes midwives, sometimes grotesquely curious neighbours, were literally peering at the bride during the act or inspecting her afterward. And failure? Complete public shame, sometimes even fines or violent consequences. The stakes for a single night were terrifyingly high. Before I blow your mind with even crazier stuff, drop a comment and tell me, what's the most unbelievable historical fact you've ever heard? Because what's coming next is going to top it. And hey, if you enjoy travelling back in time with these kinds of stories, make sure to like and subscribe. That way I know to keep making more journeys into the strangest corners of history for you. Imagine being a young woman, 17 or 18, married to a man you barely know. You're terrified, exhausted, and utterly unprepared for what comes next. The medieval bedroom is no sanctuary. Beds are narrow, lumpy, and shared with everyone from the family dog to a swarm of fleas. There's no soft mattress, no fluffy blankets, just rough straw and a heavy wool cover that smells like weeks of sweat and unwashed bodies. And in winter, the chill can bite through your bones. Your husband? He may have the hygiene of a garbage heap after a week of rain. This guy hasn't seen soap in months, maybe years, and his body is coated in the natural odours of medieval life, feces, smoke, and rotting food residue. And then comes the actual act. You might think this is a private moment, a connection of love. Nope, it's a duty, a performance, sometimes even a violent one. Marital sex was seen as a transaction, a legal obligation more than an act of intimacy. Husbands often had zero interest in gentleness. Historical records describe brides being roughly handled, sometimes restrained, as if the union was a battle rather than a partnership. Pain, bleeding, and bruising were common. Some historians even document brides fainting from shock or exhaustion during the first night. But it gets worse. Hygiene is non-existent. Condoms are medieval myths, usually nothing more than animal intestines or linens soaked in vinegar. Diseases, infections, and parasites spread like wildfire. If your spouse has any sexual diseases, there's no cure. Antibiotics are centuries away, and the bride's body, if she bleeds excessively, she could be accused of witchcraft or deceit. The legal and social consequences are terrifying. If you thought the public humiliation at the wedding feast was bad, imagine this. One tiny mistake in the marriage bed could ruin your life forever. And in many regions, the couple's night might involve ceremonial rituals so bizarre that modern sensibilities can barely process them. Sometimes the bride was required to show a piece of bloodied linen to prove virginity to a crowd. Yes, you heard that right. A literal piece of cloth soaked in blood, as proof that a man had the right to claim her for life. The trauma of that night could haunt someone for years, if not decades. It's not like the groom has it easy either. You might assume that being a man means a simple, even enjoyable experience, but medieval expectations crush that illusion. First, there's the pressure. Your social status, inheritance rights, even your reputation as a man hinge on your performance. You're expected to show virility, endurance, and control, all while possibly drunk from the wedding feast. If you fail, the bride's family could mock you, challenge you to duels, or even demand a replacement bride price. Imagine the embarrassment of being considered inadequate in front of a medieval crowd, an insult that could follow you for life. And endurance? Forget modern ideas of romance. Medieval texts describe grooms suffering from exhaustion mid-act, sometimes collapsing, sometimes vomiting. Some records note that men used various stimulants, alcohol, herbs, and even bizarre concoctions to enhance performance, many of which caused hallucinations or illness. In colder climates, the bed was often freezing, and the room filled with smoke from a central fire. Between the physical discomfort, the stench, and the unrelenting pressure to perform, many grooms ended the night in a combination of shame and literal hypothermia. And if the bride resisted, either from fear, pain, or trauma, it could escalate into violent struggle. This wasn't love-making, it was a trial by fire, testing endurance, willpower, and sometimes sanity. And then there's the aftermath. No one talks about recovery, no one hands you a hot bath, soft sheets, or sympathy. You're expected to act normal the next morning, to walk into a crowd of witnesses, smile, and maybe drink more sour ale to mask the trauma. Sleep deprivation, injuries, and shame compounded in ways modern couples can barely imagine. Hold on to your seat because this next part is going to mess with your head. The medieval wedding night wasn't just a personal ordeal, it was a social performance with consequences that could destroy entire families. If you thought the horror ended with the act itself, think again. Some regions added nightmarish rituals to the equation. In parts of Europe, newlyweds were subjected to the so-called first night, or droit du seigneur. Legends claim, sometimes exaggerated but horrifyingly plausible, that lords had the right to sleep with the bride on her wedding night before the husband did. Even if it was rare, records suggest that sexual rights were often exercised coercively. Imagine being forced to share the most intimate night of your life with a complete stranger with social power over you. Other traditions required the bride to be displayed in semi-public fashion to show obedience and compliance. Songs, mock trials, and humiliating games were played. Couples were sometimes required to act out symbolic marriages with animals or ritualistic objects, demonstrating fertility or alignment with the gods. The level of psychological stress was unimaginable, particularly for the bride. And let's talk about fertility tests. Some communities believed that a bride had to produce children immediately, or she risked accusations of witchcraft, impotence, or sin. Midwives and older women would sometimes observe the couple during sexual activity, all under the guise of ensuring marital success. You're not just getting married, you're entering a legal, religious, and mystical trial that tests your body, mind, and soul all at once. By the end of the night, if you survived the act, the rituals, and the audience scrutiny, there was still no comfort. Feast continued, gossip spread, and everyone had an opinion about your performance. Shame, fear, and exhaustion were the true gifts of a medieval wedding night, leaving both partners traumatized long after the hall lights went out. So let's step back and ask the obvious question. Could you survive a medieval wedding night today? The answer is no. Think about it. You'd face extreme public scrutiny, abysmal hygiene, brutal physical demands, coercive rituals, disease, starvation-level diets, and social consequences for every mistake. Modern people, conditioned by comfort, privacy, and medical care, would collapse under the weight of what was considered normal back then. Your nerves would snap, your body would rebel, and your mind would likely fracture trying to reconcile the horrors of the day with what you know as a sane life. And it wasn't just about individual experience. Entire communities were invested in this night. Witnesses, family, clergy, and even local officials all played a role in enforcing expectations. The psychological pressure was as punishing as the physical ordeal. You couldn't hide, you couldn't negotiate, and you couldn't complain without facing severe consequences. Here's the mind-blowing part. Despite all this, these practices persisted for centuries. Families, communities, and societies considered these extreme, terrifying rituals necessary for social order, inheritance rights, and religious approval. This wasn't fringe behavior, it was mainstream medieval life, And for every noble, there were countless serfs who endured even worse conditions, with far less protection or recognition. So next time you complain about a stressful wedding, remember this. Medieval couples faced a night so horrifying, so extreme, and so publicly scrutinized that our modern concept of intimacy, comfort, and personal safety would be incomprehensible to them. You would fail spectacularly, and history shows exactly why. And here's the kicker to leave you reeling. Some historians argue that these extreme rituals directly influenced marriage customs for centuries, embedding control, shame, and performance pressure deep into European cultural DNA. Every time you hear about wedding nerves or first night jitters, remember, our ancestors had nightmares that would make those modern anxieties laughably tame. If that blew your mind, imagine the countless other forgotten horrors history holds. Hit subscribe, because history is full of stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world.